Have you ever looked at a sacred text and wondered if there's something hiding just beneath the surface, more than just the words on the page? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating theory. It suggests the Quran might have this hidden mathematical structure, like a symphony of numbers just waiting to be heard.
And that really brings us to the big question for today, doesn't it? Could there actually be a deliberate mathematical pattern, this divine symphony, woven right into the fabric of this ancient book? So where does an idea like this even begin? Well, for many believers, it starts with verses just like this one. It kind of sets the stage. It suggests this expectation of perfect coherence, a text with zero contradictions. And that idea, that sense of flawlessness, that's really the theological launchpad for this whole search for deeper patterns.
And that leads us straight to a really important concept, munasaba. Now, this isn't some new age idea. It's a long-standing tradition in Islamic scholarship, and it's all about studying the Quran's internal connections. The core belief is that the chapters and verses aren't just random. They're part of this incredibly intricate, interconnected whole. That divine symphony we talked about, this is the formal name for it.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll dig a little deeper into that divine symphony idea. Then we're going to jump into the modern theory that tries to map it out with numbers. We'll look at the basic operations, how they're used to connect the dots, and then, we'll step back and ask, what's the point of all this?
Okay, let's start at the beginning. We're talking about this divine symphony, or as it's known in Islamic scholarship, munasaba.
So for literally centuries, theologians and scholars have been poring over this text. They've been analyzing how themes in one chapter seem to echo another, or how a question raised early on gets answered way later. The whole argument is that the Quran's 114 chapters, or surahs, aren't just a random collection. No, they're in a very specific, very meaningful order, and together they create one unified message. It's a huge field of study, all based on some really deep textual analysis.
All right, so you've got this very traditional, centuries-old concept. So how in the world does modern math get involved? Well, that's where the concatenate transform theory comes in. It's all about applying a totally new, numerical lens to this ancient idea of harmony. Now, the key thing to get here is that this theory isn't just, pulling numbers out of a hat. Not at all. What it does is propose a really systematic set of rules, a whole mathematical framework, to try and visualize those structural connections that scholars of munasaba have been talking about for ages. Think of it like a new tool for a very old quest.
Okay, so how does this theory actually work? What's under the hood? Well, believe it or not, it all boils down to two surprisingly simple mathematical operations.
All right, check this out, because it's actually pretty straightforward. On one side, we have the cat function. Yeah, cat, short for concatenation. All this does is smush digits together. So if you have 2, 8, and 6, cat turns them into the number 286. Easy, right? Then on the other side, we have doctor, which is short for digital root. This one's also simple. You just reduce a number down to a single digit by adding its digits together. So, for example, the number 114. You just do 1 plus 1 plus 4, and what do you get? You get 6.
And that number 6, which, remember, we got from the total number of chapters in the Quran, well, in this theory, that's seen as the first big clue. So, why? What's so special about the number 6?
Well, it turns out that in mathematics, the number 6 is what's known as a perfect number. It's actually the very first one. That just means its divisors, the numbers that divide into it evenly, add up to the number itself. So, for the people who follow this theory, finding a perfect number right at the foundation of the Quran's structure, well, they see that as a huge sign of divine order and completeness.
All right, so we have our building blocks, cat and doctor. So now let's look at how the theory actually uses them to build bridges between different numbers. And it does this using something called T-chains.
So what's a T-chain? Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a recipe. It's a transformation sequence that gives you step-by-step instructions. It tells you exactly when to use cat, when to use doctor, when to add or subtract, all to connect one number to another and supposedly reveal some kind of hidden meaning.
Okay, let's just walk through a quick example so you can see how it works. In this theory, certain numbers are seen as important starting points, and 19 is one of them. So step 1, we start with 19. Step 2, we take two other digits, 3 and 8, and use the cat function to stick them together. That gives us 38. And for the final step, we just add our starting number, 19, to that 38. And what does that give us? We land on 57.
Okay, so we landed on the number 57. So what? What's the big deal? Well, get this. Proponents of the theory point out that 57 is the exact number of chapters found in the final 3 sections of the Quran. And, bam! This is a perfect example of what the theory tries to do. It links a seemingly random mathematical result directly to a concrete physical part of the book's structure.
And this is where we have to step back and ask a bigger question. What's the end goal here, really? Is the whole point of this just to, prove your faith with a calculator? Let's talk about what the ultimate purpose is supposed to be.
You see, for the people who adhere to this theory, the goal is not about creating some kind of airtight mathematical proof that forces people to believe. It's not about that at all. It's more of a tool for spiritual reflection. It's about using the language of numbers to connect with the text in a new way, to really appreciate its complex design, and to reflect on what they call its ijaz, which means its miraculous, inimitable nature.
All right, so let's do a quick recap of the whole shebang. It all starts with munasaba, that core belief in the Quran's deep internal harmony. Then you have the concatenate transform theory, which is like a modern mathematical tool used to explore that harmony. It uses those super simple operations, cat and doctor, in sequences called T-chains to connect the dots. And maybe the most important takeaway is this. For its proponents, this isn't about mathematical proof. It's a spiritual journey, a new way to appreciate the text's miraculous nature. It's ijaz.
And that kind of leaves us with one final, bigger question to chew on, doesn't it? If we zoom out from the specific theory, from this one text, what does it say about us? How do patterns, whether we find them in scripture, in the spirals of a galaxy, or in our own DNA, how do they shape our universal, deeply human search for meaning?